Good morning, world.
Good morning out there. Well, 2020 is almost to an end, and we hope you guys enjoyed the holidays.
Holidays? You mean like Kwanzaa?
No, Brian, the holidays. The holiday, Christmas.
Okay, well, why did you say Christmas?
You see it in print. You see it in the stores, and they put on their sales. They say, come to our holiday sale, and you go to the work, and you go to the holiday party, and it's the holidays. I've said Christmas my entire life. I just start saying holidays because everybody... You know what? We should talk about that in this video.
We'll get to it.
Stay tuned. I'm Cedric.
And I'm Brian, and this is Cedric and Brian. All right. Yeah, Cedric, I made it through Christmas. It was a different kind of Christmas because, we didn't have many people over.
Yeah, I think it was a different Christmas for everybody.
Yep. But what I want to talk about today is... have you heard of this fable? I guess it's a fable about the frog in the boiling water.
Yes.
You've heard that, right? So for those of you who don't know it, the story goes like this. They say that if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll immediately jump out. But if you put the frog in water that's room temperature and slowly turn that heat up, the frog will stay in there and eventually die because he's sitting in boiling water.
Right.
So... that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, us being the frogs, and what we're going through today in society being that pot of water that's slowly being turned up.
Slowly being, changed.
Okay, so we pretty much understand that the story of the frog and the water is pretty much a good story for allegory reasons and to draw a good parallel to what's going on. But what's it got to do with what we're talking about today?
Because I think it goes together with being willfully blind, and I'll get to that too, because I think in a lot of cases... the frog is willfully blind when he's just sitting in the water and slowly burning.
Right.
Because he's probably like, it's getting kind of warm in here, but he's just kind of ignoring it. I don't know if that's a perfect analogy, but I'm going to give you some analogies, and hopefully that makes more sense.
Probably because it's such a slow, gradual, minute change, he doesn't notice it.
Yeah. So, again, it's not perfect, but I'm gonna bring those two things together for you.
Okay.
All right? My first example of being willfully blind, since... my man to the right here, he's a Brady fan. He's a Bronco fan, but he also likes Tom Brady. I don't know if it's because of his dashing good looks or if he just appreciates him as the GOAT of
My
the NFL.
dashing good looks have nothing to do with the fact that I like Tom Brady.
So, a lot of people like Tom Brady because they just like a winner, but we can get back to that later.
Okay.
But here's my point. For those of you who remember Deflategate. You remember Deflategate?
Yes.
So... there was evidence that the Patriots deflated the footballs just enough so that Tom Brady could throw them and hold them easier in the weather conditions that he was facing. So it became this big thing. Is that cheating? That's not really fair. They're really not. They're supposed to have a certain PSI. That's pounds per square inch, right? Mm-hmm. Of the football. And they said that he didn't have it. Was it true? Was it not true? But here's where people are willfully blind. For those that are Patriot fans or Brady fans, it didn't matter how much evidence there was that they cheated. To them, they didn't cheat, they didn't believe any of the stories, and in their eyes, they won fair and square.
Right.
So
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they made allowances for Tom Brady because, one, like you said, they're either Patriot fans and or they're Tom Brady fans. And I know the argument was, well, the other quarterback on the opposing team should be allowed to do the same thing. If you want to deflate the ball to make it comfortable for you and your receivers, do it. But I understand what you're saying. Per NFL rules, the balls are supposed to be inflated to a certain PSI.
yes,
And they weren't.
right. Okay. So if you were a Patriot fan, you were willfully blind. You didn't care about that.
Right. And I understand what you're saying, Brian, because you can be willfully blind. You can be so... like the frog, so immersed into a situation that you don't notice the change even when it's right in front of you. There's a great Netflix series, I thought it was great. There was a great Netflix series that came out recently called Manhunt, Deadly Games. And it basically details the story, for those of you who remember, the bombing at the 96 Olympics when security guard Richard Jewell was accused of bombing what was going on. Now, after weeks and months of being, I guess he was, they used a great term, he was tried by the media. We've seen enough of that going on today. He was tried by the Atlantic Journal, Constitution, and CNN, if you've heard of them. And basically he was tried by the media as being guilty. And as time went on, evidence was mounting that it wasn't him. It was another gentleman by the name of Eric Rudolph. even in the face of all that mounting evidence, people still to this day believe that it was Richard Jewell because they were forced to believe that. And the FBI themselves didn't want to give up their position because, and I'm going to say it's because of ego. And I always tell people that a man's best friend and his worst enemy is his ego. It will help us do incredible, great things, but at the same time, that ability to say, you know what, I may be wrong, is hard for some people or some groups to say.
So the FBI was willfully blind.
The FBI was willfully blind.
Okay.
They had to save their ego.
Okay, good. That's another example. Does all this sound familiar? How about stealing of signs in baseball? We're LA people. The Dodgers ended up winning this year, but the year before, the team they played was accused of stealing signs, which again is against the rules. If you were a fan of that team, which team was that again?
Houston Astros. Yes.
If you're a Houston fan, you're going to be willfully blind. It doesn't matter how much evidence, your team won. How about an election?
So this isn't about sports. This is about something a little bit deeper.
Well, it's in general. It's a general statement, but we see it over and over again. Those that think that there was tampering of the election, all right?
Right.
They see what they see. Those that think that Biden won, they see what they see. One side's being willfully blind, so you can come up with your own conclusions. We have ours, and again, it doesn't matter if there was actual provable tampering. Even if you say there was no vote switching, if you look at all of the major news media, you could say that they stole the election.
First of all, the mail-in voting set it up for fraudulent activity to take place. Now, I have to put a little disclaimer right here. Me and Brian aren't being pro-Trump here. We're being pro-voting. That regardless of who won, whether it was the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate, there was something egregiously wrong with our voting process this year. And I think it started in with the mail-in voting. There was enough evidence being presented over time, whether it was people tampering with the ballots, people voting in dual or bilateral states. You could vote in this state and that state. There was enough evidence to show that there was something wrong with the voting process, and you can choose to look at that, or like Brian was saying, you can choose to turn a blind eye to it and say, it didn't really happen.
Or you can justify it and say, oh, maybe there was, but it wasn't enough to change the election. Maybe it wasn't, but again, not to admit it is to be willfully blind.
Right.
There was a time that people valued the truth. Whether it was going to hurt you or help you, you knew that you would learn something from knowing the truth. Now, it just seems like, especially in the political realm, that it doesn't matter what the truth is. They don't want to, like you said earlier, they don't want to admit they're wrong, right?
Yeah, the ego comes into play. And, in our great state of California, that's very applicable to certain people. Isn't that right, Nancy Pelosi? Just a quick story I can tell about the ability to say that I'm wrong. It's very powerful. And I've noticed that even with my own kids, especially having two daughters, to see it in their eyes that they saw me as a person of power and had authority. But for me to come to them and say, you know what, I made a mistake. I was wrong. That kind of let down the walls and the barriers, and we have more open lines of communication, and they could trust me more because they knew that they could speak their peace of mind and know that if I was wrong, I would admit it. And I think there was one time I was wrong.
One time.
At one time, and I did admit it, and it opened up the floodgates for communication.
It's a good thing you learned.
Yes.
That one time.
Yeah.
On the same subject, and it kind of ties into this, my wife's watching the O.J. trial on Netflix, the whole mockumentary, whatever you want to call it. But we lived through that. I mean, it was right after the Rodney King riot. So I mean, things were kind of rough during that time. And then you had the O.J. trial, and that was the first time in my life that I saw, oh my gosh, it doesn't appear that the truth is going to matter.
Right.
Because you saw the mounting evidence. It's like it didn't matter. There was blood in the Bronco. There was blood at his home of Nicole and was it Ron?
Yes, Ron Goldman.
Yeah, Ron Goldman.
Yes.
None of that seemed to matter. It was all the ends justify the means, because you have to know back then, it was right after we had riots because of the whole Rodney King thing. So now you had a media that kind of whispered under the thing, wow, we're divided on this, and it happened to be down black and white lines for the most part.
Right.
And they basically were saying, and some of the jurors came out afterwards and said, we don't want the riots anymore. We're going to have to acquit. Doesn't matter. If the gloves don't fit, you must acquit.
Right.
They ran with that, even though, ignore the fact that he was trying to put gloves over gloves. So, and I know there was just, I mean, I didn't know you back then, but what did you feel about that whole OJ
I think that was one of the first time that was back in '92, I believe.
94, I think it
94?
ended. The trial went on. Like,
Yeah. Right. And that was the first time I remember thinking, like, kind of like you said, like, man, the truth is right there in front of our face. And then if you were weak-minded enough, there was enough television coverage and enough by the defendant team to make you doubt yourself, to think like, you know what, maybe he didn't do it. But I'm thinking everybody knew that, even the dog knew he did it. And
but what's funny is if you did, because that's when I started listening to, I think, Larry Elder back then.
right.
And he would interview people, and if you were black back then, not everybody, again, I'm not saying everybody,
Right.
but a large majority of people that were black back then actually said they think he didn't do it.
Well, that was a we got you back victory because
that's what I think,
Rodney King,
Yeah.
the cops that beat him down were got off. So now that we gave you one, now you owe us one.
Yeah. And if they came out, and if people came out and just said that, it's like, okay, I understand what you're saying, but is that right? And we talked about that in a couple episodes ago. Just because the end justifies the means does not make it right. It doesn't make it moral.
Yeah. And I was kind of sad. I mean, I was saddened by that because I said I don't want the justice system to be about black and white. I want it to be about right and wrong.
Yeah.
If you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, you're right. And color shouldn't matter. But now we've completely digressed to that so much more now.
Yeah, it's the 90s times 100.
Yeah.
So
it is a complete and total damn shame.
I think I'm hearing this narrative now with the whole election. So more and more people seem to think, even the ones who were saying, I don't think it was rigged, they're coming around to say, things aren't right. But, and they say but if we give it back to Trump, holy cow, the riots will be terrible. So again, we're letting society and violence determine right and wrong. And I just don't think it's right. And again, it's now you've got the people on the right that are saying that. So you have these Republicans saying Trump might have really won the election, but we cannot give it to him because the riots will be terrible. The country will be divided. But again, you're being willfully blind.
And that's really silly because the decision to be divided or undivided is completely up to that individual, regardless of who's in office. I mean, I can't, and it's hard to believe that, and it's so weird that the moment that people assume that Biden was the winner of the election, there hasn't been. You haven't heard anything. Have you heard anything about a black man being shot by the police?
No.
Have there been any riots?
Not that's on the news.
It's not on the news. The news isn't paying attention to it. And it's probably still happening. It's just that it's not on the news anymore because
they don't need it anymore.
They don't need it.
Yeah. I know.
Make sure you guys watch this video in about 36 to 38 months because it will start all over again.
Yeah.
When the left needs BLM to act a fool again.
So what does this have to do about the frog and the boiling water? Basically, we don't want the riots anymore. If we have the riots, the frog jumps out of the pot.
Right.
But then slowly, we just keep accepting things, and we slowly turn that temperature up. And then everything will be okay until the frog dies.
Yeah. You ever had frog legs?
I have.
Yeah?
Yeah. When we could go on cruises, back in the day, right. We would always try whatever they would have. Okay. So sometimes they would have frog legs, and I got to try it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Cruises when I usually try food that I would normally never eat.
Yes, get loads of it. Yeah, but like you're saying, though, we're just getting to the point where we're just being subjected to stuff over and over again, and we're accepting it because we're that's what I was saying earlier about the whole mask thing. I mean, I know people who are just fighting against, and again, I don't want to get into that, whether you believe in the power of the mask or you don't believe in it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like Brian was saying, just accepting things as the new norm because it's being pushed on us over and over again, and we're just kind of shrugging our shoulders and like, oh, well, we'll just acquiesce and we'll just play along.
Yep, that's slowly turn up. It's also called gaslighting.
Yes.
Yeah, don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yes, is that Wizard of Oz clip?
If we told people in March that we were going to be shut down for, 9 months now?
Yeah.
We would have been that frog. We would have jumped out of the water. But instead they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And then 2 weeks turned into 2 months, and 2 months turned into 9 months. But since they did it gradually, they turned that temperature up gradually. You see people still wearing masks. In California, there's no outdoor dining yet. I was just shopping with my wife, and there's tons of people in stores.
Right.
But there is no evidence that outdoor dining transmits COVID.
None.
But we just accept it because, hey, we're trying to save just one life, right?
Right.
In fact, I just saw some stats in San Francisco. There are now more suicides than deaths from COVID in San Francisco.
Yeah.
All right? I thought we were trying to save just one life. Instead, you're destroying lives. So you're taking something that, for one, believe the science. The science hasn't been right most of the time through this. And you're telling people now to stay home, not work. They get depressed, and now suicides are going up. So again, and Trump said this at the beginning, that the cure cannot be worse than the disease.
Right.
At this point, in San Francisco, the cure is worse than the disease. And it's happening more and more. And I'm not denying that it's getting bad right now. We're in cold and flu season. More people are going to get sick, but that happens every single year. More people die from the flu between December and February. Is it more than normal? Yes, of course it is, because COVID is a real thing. But again, it is still only 0.05 for the most of us,
Right.
deadly. So again, and when we go to certain things that they convince you because they've scared you enough, like outdoor eating, now you just stay in your room, and actually people, whole families that we know, are giving it to each other because they're not leaving the house. Right. So one person ends up with it, and we don't even know how they get it nowadays, and then they pass it to everybody in the family.
Right. I don't know. I think the only reason we're involved in a pandemic, and I could be wrong on this, the only reason we're in a pandemic is because the media told us we were. I mean, think about that for a second. The media didn't say we're in a pandemic. We probably go about our lives as normal.
Yeah, because, and I know, again, we're not denying the fact that more people have died this year. Are they all from COVID? Probably not. But more people have died of this strain of a flu virus or a coronavirus, than in the past. But in 1968, I believe, they had I guess it was a pandemic or something.
Right,
It was a bad flu strain that killed thousands and thousands of people, but the news didn't cover it. So
that was during Woodstock.
Yeah. People went out and free love in Woodstock. And here's where we talk about the media, and I don't know if this would be considered willfully blind, if it's considered slowly turn that temperature up. But we were told in the middle of this deadly pandemic that it was okay to go out and protest for George Floyd. Mm-hmm. And you saw thousands of people shouting, even saw people take over a whole city in Seattle. That was okay. You had a group of 100 people were protesting against the lockdown, and they were told that they were going to spread and kill everybody.
Right. They're super spreaders.
So again, who's willfully blind there? I mean, it depends on what side you're on. But I mean, if you look at the evidence, you got to believe one or the other. You can't say, oh, it's okay to go out and riot because of social justice if there's an actual pandemic. But if it's not an actual pandemic, then yes, of course they want you to go out and riot and protest.
Okay, Brian, as we wrap this up, what about the frog in the water?
If we distract and confuse you long enough and don't hit you with the hard facts or the hot water, then you're just going to go along with it and just go with the flow, as they say.
Be careful about being that person who always goes with the flow. You think about the trout. The reason the trout is so strong because it doesn't go with the flow. It swims against it. And we're not telling you to be rebellious or to go against what society wants, but it's hard going with the flow because you don't know where the flow is going. You don't know what's cool in 1996 as opposed to what's cool in 2000, as opposed to what's cool in 2020. But what me and Brian are saying, like our forefathers, it's having those hard principles, morals, ethics, and values, and not going with the flow because something is cool this year. Like me and Brian, we've joked about it. I think we've gone from colored people to African American to black to now POCs.
Yeah.
And we keep changing.
Yeah.
It's like, stay consistent, stay solid, depend on the truth.
Let's circle back to the beginning. So I was giving Cedric a hard time. I mentioned Kwanzaa. I'm going to digress real quick. Half my family, I grew up, my mother was Jewish. Christmas time is when her side of the family, the Jewish side of the family, came over. They loved seeing the Christmas tree.
Right.
They weren't offended by it. So this whole thing, on Halloween, do we say happy holidays? No. Right? We don't say happy holidays. Even though a lot of people think it's a pagan holiday, they don't want to celebrate it, they still say happy Halloween. They say happy Thanksgiving. They say happy New Year, right?
Yeah.
Christmas is an American holiday. If you watched our episode, it became a national holiday in 1870. It is not offensive to say Merry Christmas because you are addressing that day. You are not discounting other people. This was the frog in the water. We slowly start taking that out, even though it doesn't make sense to say happy holidays, because you would never say that at Halloween. You would say happy Halloween. Right? So you say Merry Christmas because you're talking about Christmas. Right? If you know they're Jewish, say happy Hanukkah. If they're like Cedric, you can say happy Kwanzaa.
That's not true.
But I get angry, and I'm not a religious Christian like you are.
Right.
I don't get offended with Merry Christmas. I think growing up, it was one of the most magical times for probably a different reason than Cedric, but it was an American holiday that just spread joy, happiness. People were, you gave presents to people, taught kids that giving is good. So anyways, I just want to bring that around because I'm going to do one more bash here. Every president in his Christmas cards said Merry Christmas until which president?
I'm going to take a wild guess. Was it the one who was elected in 2008?
It was. He was the first president to say, I think he said happy holidays. He took Christmas out of Christmas.
No comment.
So I hope you all had a happy Christmas or a Merry Christmas, even if you don't celebrate that. And it's funny, my neighbors next door, they're from the Middle East.
Yeah.
Okay? The Middle Easterners from an Arab country. They had the most religious decorations for Christianity on their lawn than anybody in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's right here. I'll put it up right there. Because they understand. They left a country where they were probably persecuted for being Christian.
And you're right. You gotta say Merry Christmas, whether you see Jesus as the Bible portrays him as our Savior, or you see him as the most popular historical figure in our history.
It's just a holiday in America since 1870.
Right. It's Merry Christmas.
There's people throughout history that celebrate Christmas that are secular. Europe is mainly secular. They celebrate Christmas. So I don't get this. I don't believe this whole argument that people get offended. Why get offended?
You gotta stay pissed off about something.
It's that boiling water.
You gotta keep
boiling
that
water. Remember I joked with you?
Divisiveness going.
Remember I joked with you on our Christmas episode that we may be losing Christmas? You said, "Oh, I hope not."
Oh, jeez, I don't.
Yeah. If you just keep letting that happen and you don't recognize that we celebrate on the 25th, whether you believe that Jesus was the Son of God or not, we celebrate Christmas on the 25th.
Right.
Okay, we don't celebrate a holiday. Okay, Halloween isn't a happy holiday. Christmas is the holiday. Sorry, I beat that up a lot.
Yes.
The Jew defending Christmas.
Right. The irony. Jeez. Before we go, we gotta show you something really quick here. Oh my goodness.
There you go. I don't want you to hurt yourself.
That's all right.
I got it.
Make sure, and I'll hold the back here, the American flag there. You can tell them about our hats, Brian.
So now you can go on our bio and you'll see a tab that just says hats. The merchandise for shirts is Teespring, but for hats, for these good hats, custom fit hats, they're fitted. You get that under our hats tab, and I'm also going to put it in the description here. You'll see it. It's the top one. It's called, I think it's Grace something. You'll see it.
Okay.
But that's where you can get these hats. You can support us. And if you did notice, you might have seen an ad now because we did get monetized.
Well, you have those annoying ads in our videos now.
I know. And you probably don't need to buy the hat because, Cedric, I looked how much we made so far.
How much?
We have made our first penny.
Yes.
I think we should hang the penny on the wall.
All right. Goodness.
You don't make a lot on YouTube, so please support us.
But for those of you who are offended by Lincoln, we won't put the penny up on the wall.
That's right. Lincoln has now been stripped from history.
Who are we going to put on the penny?
God, I don't know.
We'll get into that next video. Well, anyway.
I'd say Martin Luther King, but they don't like him anymore either.
And I can go.
It's going to be Barack Obama.
Oh, jeez. But then people are going to say, well, he's on the penny. You don't see him as worth anything.
You're right. You can't win. You can't win.
Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you like, Make sure you subscribe, make sure you ring that bell, and share this video with everyone you know. And we'll see you in a few days as we do our New Year's Eve video.
Yes.
Okay, yes. And we're coming to the end of 2020, guys. Keep loving each other. And until next time, I'm Cedric.
And I'm Brian. See you later.